Pessoal, bom dia a todos. Quem ainda não tive a oportunidade de conhecer, meu nome é Rômulo Bertuzzi, sou professor do Departamento de Esporte e hoje estou aqui na função de presidente da comissão de pesquisa. Antes de passar a palavra para a nossa palestrante do ciclo de conferências, eu gostaria de dar um recadinho para vocês, que é referente ao certificado. Então, quem tiver interesse em receber o certificado via online, por favor, preencham esse formulário que eu vou passar para vocês, com os dados de forma legível, para que vocês possam depois receber via e-mail o link do certificado, tá bom? Gostaria de agradecer ao professor Luiz por ter sido anfitrião da professora Brown. Brown? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Brown, to be here. Thanks so much. I will ask you for Professor Luiz to introduce you in Portuguese. After that, and give you for a statutory speech. Okay? Obrigado, Luiz. Professor Luiz vai fazer a gentileza, então, de apresentar a professora um pouquinho do trabalho dela para você, em seguida passa a palavra para a professora, tá bom? Obrigado, Luiz.
Obrigado pela introdução, Rômulo. Bom, a palestra vai ser em inglês, mas eu creio que um ritmo, como a professora não é nativa, então isso costuma ajudar bastante, né, para quem não é nativo também entender o inglês. Então eu tenho um prazer muito grande, very pleased to introduce Professor Bouwien Smits-Engelsman. And some of the remarkable points in her biography. She is an internationally recognized authority on neuromotor rehabilitation and neuromotor disorders. She's a leading researcher on motor control deficiencies and the treatment of children with developmental disorders, coordination disorders, genetic syndromes, and cerebral palsy. Between 2005 and 2015. So between 2005 and 2015, she worked in the Motor Control Laboratory Research Center for Movement Control and Neuroplasticity in the University of Bouwien, conducting research on fine motor control deficits due to brain damage. She's a co-developer of some of the major motor performance tests used for children with developmental coordination disorders. Since 2014, she has been part of an expert group of scientists working with the latest hard and software for analysis of fine motor deficiencies. In 2014, she accepted as honorary professorship at Cape Town University to set up and supervise PhD students investigating developmental disabilities in low socioeconomic areas in Africa. So this is just a short presentation of her biography, and I will let her to talk to you all about this nice work.
Thank you, Louise. Since we have so few people, why are you sitting in the back? Don't you come and sit in front? It's also easier for me to interact with you guys, and it's easier to understand. Understanding or hearing me, just ask a question. I know English is not easy for a lot of you, but I always say your English is better than my Portuguese. Okay? The other thing, this is very dangerous, because if you study DCD, it's related to falls in the young, not falls in the elderly. So if I'm talking and I'm just walking that way, I'm going to be on the other side of the platform. I prepared this talk, as Louise asked me, for people who work in physical education. So it's not about therapy, but it's about the kind of children that we see with developmental coordination and their problems with physical fitness. Also, children who don't have coordination problems have problems with fitness, but this is a special group. As said in the introduction, I've been working in areas with, let's say, low socioeconomic resources, which is poor areas that you have here in Brazil as well. And we see that the amount of children with motor coordination problems is much higher there than in the more affluent or rich areas. So I think a lot of the information that I've gathered in South Africa is applicable in Brazil as well. Okay. So what's my talk going to be about? I'm going to tell a little bit about what developmental coordination order is, because I'm not sure if all of you have an idea about that. And then I'm going to talk about the relation between coordination and fitness. Just imagine that you have to do something fast, but when you're clumsy, it takes more time to do it. So if you're measuring as a physical educator, agility, for instance, in a child, it could be that you're not measuring physical fitness, but that you're measuring coordination, which means that a lot of what you do may be biased by the coordination problems. Then I'll talk a little bit about the measurements that we have developed for children with coordination problems. And then, if I still have time, I'll tell a little bit about an intervention. Okay. What is DCD? This is not DCD. This is a young child who is eating spaghetti and who is making a mess. But for young children, this is normal. Okay. So what is DCD? DCD is when children need more time or don't even learn with long time the basic fundamental skills that you expect in elementary school children, like hopping, jumping, catching a ball, walking up and down stairs, so the normal fundamental motor skills. And they either learn that way too late or they keep doing it in a very strange way. I'll show you some examples and then we can see. The other thing is, it's not just that they're clumsy, but it also hinders them in things that they want to do. And if you're not so good at playing ball, usually you'll say, I don't like ball games. And then if you don't like ball games, you're not doing it. So you get worse and worse compared to the rest of the class. Yeah? So that's where this physical educator comes in. If you miss out on the children at a certain age, they will lack the skills, and no 14-year-old child is still learning to catch a big ball. That would, that's silly, so you won't do it anymore. Okay. The other thing with DCD, it's not cerebral palsy, it's not another disease, so it's also a diagnosis by exclusion. So all the kids that have been in a car accident don't have DCD. All the kids of which the mother was drinking a lot of alcohol and they have fetal alcohol syndrome is not called DCD. They may look the same, okay? Good. This is something that looks probably very familiar for people who are taught to in physical education. Certain skills are learned at a certain age, spontaneously, and you learn them, you teach them in class. You're not going to do a very complicated skill in 4-year-olds. So there's a certain order in which children learn skills. But there's also sort of a critical time when you learn skills. That's the green areas. And if you still have to learn a skill when you're red, all the other kids in the class can already do it, all the other kids already do it on the playground, and in a way you're too late. Yeah, you can never bridge the gap anymore. Okay? just so you have a little bit of an idea. Look how he gets up. It's like everything's too loose. And it's not an accident, it happens every time. The child just can't do it. Okay? So as I said, this clumsiness also has an impact on things that the child has to do every day. So it's a problem to get dressed, it's a problem to eat, it's a problem to do chores, it's a problem in PE class, in the just an idea how much of a problem eating can be. Imagine you have to eat 3 times a day. So it's not just throwing and catching and jumping, it's also the simple things of daily living that are a problem. You probably say, I don't like meat. I like scrambled eggs, because it's easier. Okay. It takes forever, and I can let you watch this for 10 minutes, and then he hasn't eaten yet. Okay. So what are we talking about? We have about 1.9 billion children in this age range in the world. Approximately 5% of them have this kind of problems, which means it's a huge number. I'm pretty sure that the number in Brazil is higher than 5%. It's not only because we've been using the wrong tools, but we also have a lot of kids that have problems. Yeah? So it is a real problem, and in every class that you are teaching, you have 1 or 2 of these children. If you're teaching in poor areas, you probably have 5 in a class. Okay. The other problem is DCD often comes with something else. ADHD, kids that are very hyperactive, have poor concentration, or have learning disabilities. So that makes the thing even more complicated, and it also makes it more complicated to teach them. Okay. These are 2 of my kids in the school in South Africa, and they're playing basketball. Just to have an idea why just doing it doesn't help. So he knows what he has to do. He loses the ball on the way in. And then, you know, this is what you have to do. Okay? That's the only way he can get the ball in. So he scored, but it's not that he's developing skills. So what we see is, especially in a society where physical fitness and physical skills are very important, we see that these kids withdraw. We see that they internalize their problems. We see that they don't want to participate, that they are sad, yeah, and even depressed. So helping them in an early stage is what should be done before they become very separate from their peers. Okay. ICF framework is familiar to everybody? No? See, that's interesting. Okay, if in health science we have a problem and we want to describe the problem carefully, we use this system, and it says you can have for instance, an impairment. You can have a fractured leg. And if you have a fractured leg, you can't jump. Yeah? If you have a normal leg, but nobody ever showed you how to jump, do a long jump, you probably still can jump, but you can't jump far because you don't have the right technique. then the activity of jumping is poor. But that doesn't always have to be an underlying impairment, okay? So what's important if we look at children with DCD is that we look at activities, that we look at what they can do, and that we look if they use these activities in daily sports, in their daily games, in a normal physical education class, on the playground. So we're more looking at the impact on daily life than that we are so much looking at, is there some limitation in a joint, or is there one muscle that doesn't have enough strength? So you're more looking at the whole picture. Okay? Does it make sense? Good. Okay. So what is important for you guys to remember, it's not just poor coordination. These kids have a problem in daily functioning. They are at risk for secondary cardiovascular diseases. Yeah? And their social well-being, especially for the age group where gross motor is still very important. It becomes less important when you're in secondary school. And you can be very good because you're smart. But in elementary school, it's very important that you're skilled. Yeah? So the impact of DCD is even larger in poor societies. So that is something that I think is very important if you train to be a PE teacher in low socioeconomic areas, that you're aware that you have a lot of these children in your class. Okay? So what's the relation between motor control and physical fitness? Well, one of the things that is very important is that to become physically active and to stay physically active, you need to have movements. You need to have games, you need to have fun, because otherwise you're not going to do it. If you think it's boring to go to a gym and do a leg press, you won't do it anymore. It's much more fun to run after a ball and to play soccer. It's much more fun to do hide and seek. It's much more fun to do games that kids like. But if you always lose, you won't participate. Yeah? And if nobody wants you in the team when you want to play soccer, then you withdraw. Okay? So if you don't have the basic skills of jumping, running, throwing, you can't participate in a lot of sports. So it does have repercussions for your active life, for the skills that you develop, and the gap between you and the other kids will get larger and larger if you get older. I'm testing kids in South Africa at the moment, and the rest heart rate of my DCD children in elementary school is already different from the normal ones. You know, these are 8, 9, 10-year-old children, and we already see the differences. Okay, I don't know if you know this schedule, I really like it. Fundamental motor skills are important for fundamental sports, and they call that physical literature, which is a nice term. So you have a vocabulary of skills that you can use in your different sports. Yeah? And that all leads to active life. Okay. Well, one of the things that is very important for everybody who measures physical fitness in children with poor coordination is that you look at the validity. This is a very renowned researcher in DCD, and they looked at how good, how the relation is between inactivity and motor competence. Just do a mental experiment with me, okay? So there are a few boys, sorry for the girls, a few boys playing soccer, and you like to come in, and you see them, and you know you're not so good. And then are you going to ask, can I play with you? Probably not. Imagine you are playing with them, and then you've made a lot of errors, and they say, well, maybe we should change you for somebody else. So by doing that a few times, the children perceive themselves as being unskilled, as being clumsy. So by having the peers judging you the whole time, and by having your mom say, well, don't play soccer anymore because every time you fall, your knees are scratched, or so there are a lot of systems that take these kids away from being active, which means they get less experience, less exposure, and the idea is that perceived competence is very important in this. That's where a good physical educator can help. Because not all kids need to be doing exercise at the same level. You know that you can make smaller groups, that you can adapt to tasks, so that these children also can feel that they can learn, that they at least can master a certain task. So this is already something where you can have a very big influence. Yeah? You can do it. We'll make the task a little bit easier. So we have a few kids that have a very large target and they're shooting balls, or we have the basketball net lower, or there's a lot of things that you can do for them to be able to master something. So if your motor competence is low, your physical activity will go down, your perceived competence will down, and you won't do it anymore, and you'll end up with secondary problems. Yeah? We've done a study in South Africa where we asked the children for perceived competence. How good do you think you are at doing this? And the results are scary, because this is the checklist, and it predicts as much about the motor competence and about BMI as the whole movement ABC, which is a standardized test. So the fact that you think you're poor is very important, even if you're not poor in a motor skill. Yeah? So it's very important that we give good feedback to the kids, that we keep them active. Try it. Okay, well, you know, you did 10 times, but you had 4 times that you had success. Okay, let's see if you can do 5 out of 10. Yeah? So don't go for the max yet. Okay. For a lot of diseases and problems that we have in children, we have guidelines. And the guidelines are based on meta-analysis and all the literature that is available, so that the clinicians don't have to read all the literature. You know, if you have to read all the literature about DCD, you couldn't work. There's so much going on. So there's a group of experts that makes reads all the literature and that makes recommendations for the clinicians. And we've just finished a new guideline, and this time it's the first time that physical fitness, physical activity is in the guideline. Before that, it was only concentrated on coordination problems. But now, since we see so many secondary problems in the children, so it's entered here in that we also have to look at leisure, sports and play in these children. And it also says that it's important that they get fundamental and specific motor skills. Specific motor skills are sports related, okay? So that they know certain games and rules of certain games. So that's a huge change that the medical society is seeing, that physical activity is very important in these children. Consider physical fitness, it says in the guideline. So all the therapists and neurodevelopmental doctors should take physical fitness and physical activity into account. So there's a whole opportunity, a new area to be looked at. Okay? The problem still is, how can we measure physical activity in these children? Because we want to measure physical activity and not so much coordination. There is a lack of good instruments. We're trying and we're developing new ones every time, but there's still a problem. Because you want to measure fitness and not so much motor coordination. The problem is, there are good instruments for children, but they have not been validated for children with motor coordination problems. And the more complicated the task, the more important the coordination is. Okay, so there's one study that has really looked at the validity of tests for this group. So if you look at physical fitness, and I like this model, you know, you can use another one, but I like this one because it really relates to skills as well. So we have health-related fitness and we have skill-related fitness. So if we look at them separately, we would see that the health-related fitness has cardiorespiratory, muscular fitness, body composition, and flexibility. Yeah, this you can further divide, which we'll do later. Then if you look at the skills, it's agility, balance, coordination, speed, power, and reaction time that are important components. So if you want to do the full scala, it's a lot. What do we know for children with DCD, and for instance about cardiorespiratory fitness? So everybody uses the shuttle run, you know? Of course you've got laboratory tests, but if you look at field tests and you have the kids in school, you will use the shuttle run. Of course you can do laboratory, but let's forget about the laboratory for now. And let's look at the shuttle run. Again, Mr. John Kearney, who's really good at this, he looked at the validity of the shuttle run in children with DCD. Okay, you would say it's just running, you know? How much coordination do you need for just running? And he concludes in his paper that the shuttle run is suitable for children with DCD. Which is true, but then if you look at the data, if you look at the correlation between the laboratory measure and the field test, in boys with DCD it's 0.50. That's not good. That means that there's a large difference between the VO2 max that you measure in the laboratory. It explains only 25% of your results. That's not much. And that's for the boys. Look at the girls. If you would have a laboratory test and a field test, and you would have a correlation of 0.27, would you say that it's a valid test? I wouldn't. Would you? It's way too low. It's way too low. Yeah. If you look at the scatter plots, this is normal kids. Yeah. That's the DCD. So there's something in there that's different in these two. We've got a lot of other tests, but none of them have been validated for kids with motor coordination problems. Most of them you know, I hope. She lovely, yes, good. The most popular one. Good. So that was cardiorespiratory. At least it's been tested. If it's reliable and valid is another thing. The next step is muscular fitness. And if you look at children, anaerobic capacity is much more important than aerobic. Because when you're playing, they're never running long distance. They're doing short bouts here and there, and then they rest, and then they look. So this is far more what they do. Let's look at muscular endurance. Okay, so this is one of our own studies, and we evaluated a very simple test, 5-meter sprint with turns. So it's a bit comparable to the T test where you only have one cut, but here you have to do this time and that time. And you would say, well, it's a simple test, not so much motor coordination in it. So we thought, let's make it a little bit more complicated to see, make it a little turn. It's not much, but it already was totally different for the children with DCD than it was for the normal children. Another test that's done a lot is the repetitive intermittent sprint. where you have a short recovery period and you look at fatigue. Yeah? Problem, of course, is if it's harder for you to do it, you fatigue more. Yeah? So if we look at the results for the children with DCD, so they do 30 meters, and they have rest, and then they do another 30 meters, and they do it 6 times. And if you look at the results for the children with DCD and the reliability or the validity, we see that we have an effect size that is reasonably high. So we have a large difference between the children with DCD on these tests compared to the children with TD. And I've got the arrow here because this is the motor test, okay? But that's what the children were selected on. So you have children with very poor motor control, and then if you calculate an effect size, of course that effect size is huge because that's what you selected them on. But then if you look, these are kids that were not selected for poor physical fitness. These were kids that were sent to us because they had poor motor control, but they also had poor physical fitness. The reliability in the children with DCD was pretty okay. I like these figures. But then if you look at the raw data, you can see the problem with it. This is normal kids. Yeah, they do the pre-test and they do the post-test after 2 weeks, same thing. And this is the kid with DCD. Yeah? It's very hard to get reliable data there. Yeah? So they started out way different, and then they try and try and try. So they're much more variable. They're much more influenced by what you do. If you say, go, 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 they will go very fast, and then they'll total loss in the end because they wanted to do it fast. And then the next time they'll just, I'm so tired. And then, yeah, so there's far more influencing factors that will influence the results. So it looks like our short sprint tests will do fine for anaerobic capacity. Okay, so what else? Agility, balance. Leave that one out. Yeah. So we've looked at a lot of tests and we've all tried them out, and it looks like the short sprint test straight is the one that has the least coordination problems. You just go straight, no turning, nothing. Yeah? If you want to look more at fatigue and fatigability, you have to repeat that. So you do it 5 times, 6 times. We use 6 times. If you want to have the difference between the capacity and the coordination, running straight doesn't have so much coordination, and running in a corner has more coordination. So you can sort of sort out what is the impact of making an extra curve if you have them both and you have the same distance. Yeah? So you have the straight distance and you have the curved distance, and the difference between the two is, say, the coordination cost. Yeah? Okay. And then if you really want to look at precision stepping, the agility ladder is good. But that is really the coordination part. I'll stop, that's not working. I'll do one at a time. So this is a normal kid. Okay, no problem. behavior. Look how she ends. I'm not fast, but I'm funny. Okay. If you want to see the difference between a normal child and a DCD child, that's supposed to be agility, okay? It's supposed to be this. This is what we show them. And this is the max that they can do. Okay, so if you were just measuring time, and you would think you were measuring anaerobic capacity, you can see that in these children you're definitely measuring motor coordination. Okay. Good. The next one is muscular strength. Measuring muscular strength in children, we have several options. Of course, you can just let them push against you and you can have sort of an estimate, but that's not really measuring. You can use a dynamometer, and of course there's different apparatus that we can use, but that's hard for you to do if you're in a class. Doing a repetition maximum in kids is also not easy. So what we usually do is we use the functional strength measure, first functional strength test, that we developed specifically for children so that it is sort of a task that is close to daily activities. So we wanted the task to measure strength, we wanted it to have some kind of function, and we wanted the task to have low levels of coordination, which is impossible. There's no task that has a low level of coordination, but not super high. We tested retest reliability, which was good. We tested internal consistency, which was good. And we tested the different forms of validity, which are good. So this is the test. It has 8 different items. The first one is throwing a sandbag, and you measure the distance. The second one is a standing long jump. You measure the distance. The third one is the underarm throw with a weight different for the different ages. And then we get the lateral step up. Let's do this. Then it's chest pass with a heavy weight. We're using the bag instead of a medicine ball because the thing doesn't roll. It's easier to measure. You can do it with a medicine ball, but you have to be very careful where it lands. And then we do sit to stand as many times as you can do in 30 seconds. So that's more endurance. And then we have a heavy box that the kids have to put on the table and lift on the shelf. And do that as often as they can do in 30 seconds. And then we have stair climbing, where the kids run up and down the stairs as many times as they can do. She can at least do it. But if you compare it to what normal kids would do. Okay. So the functional strength measures has 4 items for upper extremity, 4 for lower extremity, and the same 8 items you can order in explosive and endurance. It's a simple test, takes about 20-25 minutes, and it gives you a pretty good idea of strength in children related to function. So that was strength and then power. Okay, so if you look at all the options that we have, there is a problem in measurement tools. We do have, of course, measures for body composition and flexibility. They're simple. Yeah, sit and reach is something that you probably all know. Body composition, BMI, waist circumference. And if you have more, better equipment, you can do skill measurements on the top. Summarizing, children with DCD often have physical fitness problems, including health and skill-related physical fitness. However, there is a huge variability between the children. Yeah? It's a very heterogeneous group, so you have kids that are good in anaerobic or have poor aerobic capacity, kids that are good at coordination, certain tasks, and poor in other tasks. But fitness-focused intervention should be evaluated if kids are able to do better sports, if they're participating more in sports. It's just not just training a skill, okay? Because that's not helping the children. Once they know the skill, they need to be part of a little group that is playing outside. They need to be, maybe the trainer of their team needs to be instructed. Okay, this kid is not totally at age, but could you please let him play? Because the continuation of these children having good support is very important, because they need more practice than other children. Okay, questions so far? I don't know what we time-wise.
In your measurements, strength, muscular strength, for example,
Yeah.
there is a lot of coordination, like the start climbing,
Yeah.
and you are trying to measure muscular strength, and you don't think it's a problem for drawing conclusion about the strengths?
That is the most important question. That's why we developed this, you know, of course. What we have seen, if you use a dynamometer and you measure strength over one joint, like a biceps or a triceps or quads, they don't have less strength. As soon as they have to have the strength generated in a certain order, related to the task, anticipatory control to what they're doing, that's where the problem comes. So if you would measure isolated strength, you wouldn't find anything, which proves your point. So it is important when you start contracting. It is important when you start preparing the turn. If you remember the girl running up and down the stairs, you would see before she was downstairs, she was already turning. You see, that makes a huge difference. What the other kids will do, they will running, they will stop, they will turn. So all those factors play an important role. So that's why it's not called strength test, but it's called functional strength test. And it was specifically developed to have these kinds of components in there. Still, it is important to also measure isolated strength, because there could be other sources, and that would have a different approach. You know, if you're going to go for absolute strength training, it's very different than from strength endurance training, or from training the skill first, because if the skill's better, you use your strength better. Most of these kids, if you see them jump, they all make the arm movement in the wrong direction. They will jump and they will do this, yeah, and they'll never start going in the right direction. They'll have wrong angles. They will standing like this when they jump, yeah, far too much bent, and then the legs extended. So there's a lot of skill training that can be done that will result in better use of force that you have. The problem is, the physical therapist is gone. Dorothy, don't listen. Physical therapists have no idea about the development of these skills. This is what the PE people should do. Because Now, it's important that you know the normal development. How do you train catching? How do you train jumping? What's the best angle? What's the best, without telling them the angle, okay? You can't tell these kids, bend your knees or do something. Yeah, you have to make something that they are under a cover to start with, and then jump to a balloon or something. You have to be, all this body-oriented instruction is not working for these kids because they have no clue what they're doing. So make situations in a way that they find out the right movements. Exploratory way of teaching, that's what these kids need. A lot of opportunities, a lot of balls. Yeah? I'm always making fun of physical therapists if they train catching, because they like to have the child in a circle. Not on the internet, okay? They like to have the child in a circle, and then they say, are you ready? I am going to throw the ball, and then the child is catching. That is super far from what is normally happening, you know? If that is, you do that with a 2-year-old, you warn them because you don't want to hit them in the face. But after that, the child will look at the ball and it will move. That's the main thing. You have to get your body in the direction of the ball. So it's very important that you get a lot of experience, and every now and then a ball on your nose is okay if it's not too hard. Yeah? That's how you learn. And you lose balls and they go everywhere. So a lot of exploratory teaching in this way is very important for these kids. They need to find out, how can I catch a ball? You can't tell them. You can't tell somebody how to run. You flex your hips so much, you kick your butt with your heels, that's not going to work. Okay? You need to have something that you experience that, and then, hey, this feels better. Okay? Anything else? That was the smartest question of the day. You know?
DCD is a genetic disorder or is a social economic?
Okay, that's also, is DCD a genetic disorder? Families where you have DCD more often have children with DCD, but it's not a genetic disorder. So but the chance that you have it is larger. We don't know exactly where it comes from. It's sort of a software problem, you know? But once you have this software problem and you're not exposed and you withdraw, it gets worse by the circumstances. That's probably why we see far more children with problems in poor areas, because the prenatal care is worse, the circumstances are worse, exploration options are less. That's probably why we find it, but it's not a pure genetic disorder.
You said about that's necessary. Children with DCD practice more, but how many is more, and which abilities exactly is necessary to practice? Probably you have different cases, but nowadays it's obviously that people don't stay, children don't stay so much at the ground like at the other times. The indoor activities probably are influencing this scenario. So what and how, do you have an idea of the share of the children that had DCD in a normal scenario, and which abilities exactly it's necessary to practice?
Okay.
I don't know.
I'll reverse the question, okay? How long does it take for a child to learn how to swim? You guys should know that.
What means how to swim?
Okay. What do you mean with swim? Okay, I mean with swim, a breaststroke, and you can do 25 meters without drowning. That's not something very, it doesn't have to be fast, how long would it take? Next question should be then, how old is the child? Okay? Yeah, because if that's a 3-year-old, it will be very different from a 10-year-old. But then in our country, all 10-year-olds can swim. Yeah? So if you would be a 10-year-old and you can't swim, you won't have swimming classes with 10-year-olds anymore. You'll have swimming classes with 4-year-olds. Oops, just imagine. Yeah? So if you're older and there's nothing wrong with you, normally you will learn faster. The other thing is, if you're older and you didn't have the opportunity to learn something, you won't learn it anymore. Yeah? So what I would hope is that you guys take home my message, and if you see kids that are poor in the class, a lot of the games that we do take out the kids that are poorer first. Which means that instead of them being exposed to more training, they're doing less. So find games that do the reverse. The good ones should go out and the poor ones should stay in. By just seeing that nobody is sitting on the side and that all the kids are playing at their own level, you could already help a lot. Because that's what happens. It happens on the playground, it also happens in physical education. I've been looking here at games, you know. As soon as you're struck by the ball, you sit. You shouldn't be sitting. They need time on task, they need to be playing, okay? So by changing the rules, by having a lot of different levels in your class, you can already do a lot. You can double the time that they are doing at the moment, and they need at least double. I would say they need triple. And the poorer they are, you need quadruple or something. I don't know what the word would be. Yeah? But give them the option. That's a good question. Yeah.
I have another question. My English is not so good as Luis, but
I don't know.
I agree with everything that you explained. It's very clear from myself. But I have one point that, okay, you try to overcome the difficulty to measure physical fitness, to try to isolate the coordination factor to measure better, or to consider.
To consider it. I wouldn't isolate it. You consider it. Yeah.
But if you think that DCD is a kind of structural illness or disorder, they won't overcome it.
They'll never be Olympian champions.
Never. That we have to pay attention as well for the way that they can exercise your fitness.
Yeah.
Because if you put somebody with, for example, a bicycle, okay, I can teach children with DCD to ride a bicycle, okay, but I must consider that she or he won't be in the traffic because they don't have a perception research. You have balance research to avoid.
That's an interesting one.
I think this.
Yeah, that's a good one. Did you hear the comment? Even if the child learns something, it'll never be super good, and it will also be harder to transfer it to another context. So imagine we've been learning to cycle in a nice park here where there's no traffic and the training wheels are off, and then you go into real traffic, which especially here is very dangerous. Which means that you also have to train into that context. So in the beginning, you'll go to quieter streets and you'll have the parent next to it, and I'll yell to the child, stop at the corner, and so that also the complicated situations of stopping in time for a traffic light, getting off your bike fast, that's also things that you have to train.
It's a kind of acceptance that the children or the adult have to accept that it's too much for you. You learn, but it's too much for you. I start thinking about running.
Mhm.
They have a control problem. If someone with DCD start to running a lot, a marathon, maybe it's not good for them. Because maybe they don't have the control.
Maybe they do half a marathon then.
Yes, you have to consider
No, but you
that,
know, there's certain, it's good that you realize that there are limitations.
yes.
Yeah, but you know, people can run a marathon with a prosthesis. They have a motor control problem somewhere because that joint doesn't have any information, it does, and that's possible. So I wouldn't say it's not possible, but the time that they need, the training that they need is harder. And if it's dangerous, like cycling in a city like Sao Paulo, I would be careful. Yeah? Cycling in Holland is different because there's bicycles everywhere and everybody's aware that there are bicycles coming from all sides. But here I wouldn't recommend it. It's okay on a Sunday in the beautiful park. Yeah? But then running per se, it's not that these kids are spastic. It's not that they have a joint problem. It's just that they're clumsy and they'll sometimes trip over their own feet. Okay, we'll teach them how to fall. Yeah? Have a good roll and maybe wear gloves in the beginning like you do with skaters. I wouldn't start limiting them too early. I would do that if it's a balance beam in gymnastics or something. Do something simpler. Yeah, something where you have, but even if you're my age and you're no longer good, you can still play a nice game of double tennis. Why not? I'm having fun. And you don't have to be super good to have fun in sports. Yeah? I think that's very important. The fun keeps people doing, keeps them engaged. So make it fun. Okay.
In some direction, have you data about the tracking a group of these children over years and to understand how long they can go in terms of becoming more similar to normal behavior?
Yeah, there are only a few longitudinal studies. And what we see so far is that the difference between the children with DCD and the normal children gets bigger when they get older. Yeah, we get a lot of obesity, we get a lot of secondary heart problems, not so much because of the coordination problems, but because they give up. And if you don't do anything anymore, and you might as well stay home and play computer games, and while you're playing the computer games, you're eating popcorn and drinking sweetened soda, and that's what happens. So we see a larger percentage of overweight and obese children in this group. Of course, there are also success stories. Yeah. So, but that's a small amount. Say 25 to 30% manage, and the rest don't grow out of it. So they still have problems. And you guys are the first ones to spot them. So I really think there's an obligation to put this into the curriculum and to put this into your everyday observation. Because it's so nice if you don't need therapy, you know. Once you have therapy, you've got this stamp on your head and there's something wrong with you. And you know, we have kids that are super and we have kids that are at the other tail. Well, we need to focus also on that tail. And it's much more fun to get sports and improvement in the better ones. You know, my son's a trainer, I know where that goes. It's not so much fun. You know, the progress is less, it takes much more time, it's difficult to instruct, but maybe they benefit more.
I've got a simple question. How early can we spot those differences?
How early?
Yeah.
If you have a good eye, and I think, you know, if you see a lot of children, you get what we call sort of a clinical eye. Yeah? And you expect a 4-year-old to be able to jump and get off the floor. It's not far and high, but they can do it. Yeah? You see if you throw or roll a ball to a foot and the child kicks over the ball every time, So I think you have a good general picture of what to expect because you see a lot of comparable kids. Then if you give the child a little bit of extra opportunity and you see that the child doesn't improve, that's probably one of these kids. And then of course there are tests that you can do. Yeah, there are tests that you can do with half a class. There are tests that you can do in small groups, and there are tests that you can ask a physiotherapist to do or a research assistant to do, so there are different ways, but then you're already worried. Yeah? But I think in your curriculum you have sort of goals that kids have to do at certain ages, like the one that I've shown you before. So then you see kids every time saying on the lower side, those are the ones that need a little bit of extra help. And then if the little bit of extra help doesn't work, then you have to ask somebody else to help. But I think there's already a lot that you can do in preventing them from being excluded from taking part. Keep it fun, also for the ones that are not so good. So, compare.
So probably the key is to inclusion these people, and maybe we can change the rules of the game or adapt physical activity to more participation of these people.
Well, you know, if you would do, I don't know what the games would, if you have two teams and you throw the ball against you, and if I hit you, what's this one? It's sort of dodgeball, yeah. So you can have two groups doing that, and you can make the part in between smaller or larger. You can have the rule if you're hit once, and then if somebody else throws a ball between your legs and you stand like this, you can participate again. So there are a lot of things so that you can have the kids in. You can make the play field on one side smaller and on the other side bigger. So you can have one of the pieces that you need to jump on, I don't know what the English words we call it, the box. And then you make some obstacles on one side that they can hide. Yeah? So there are a lot of little things that you can change. The other thing that is very important from your perspective is that these kids need external focused instruction. You can't tell them how their shoulder needs to be or how their hand. You need to find ways that they do the movement sort of automatically. Yeah, by going under something, they will bend their knees. By trying to hit the ceiling, they will go on their toes. So you really need to learn those kinds of instructions, which you probably have in your curriculum.
Dicas. Não pela...
Yeah, that's good.
Ensinar por dicas e não por instruções mais biomecânicas, de onde pôr o braço, tudo.
Okay.
E por inteligências múltiplas?
Como?
Se a gente ensinar ele por inteligências múltiplas?
Não, se você usar isto para gerar essas dicas, tudo bem. Mas não é esse o contexto que ela está colocando. É só comparando instruções mais mecânicas, onde você fala levanta o braço, abaixa o braço, para as instruções mais metafóricas. Você tentar algo.
Yeah, nice, thank you. Yeah. So one of the things that we notice, and one of the theories that there are about why these children don't learn, is that they don't learn from observation. So they can see you do something and then you ask them to repeat it and they have no clue what to do. So you're standing in front of the class and you're telling the kids what to do and you're showing it and they can't repeat it. So if you have a child that you show to do something like this and you ask the child to do the same thing and the child has no clue, that's probably also one of these kids. Yeah? Which means that your didactics need to be a little bit different. So you need to tell, you need to show, you need to feel, you need to do it together so that somehow the child gets an idea what to do.
Yeah, one thing that the physical education teaches is a problem for us, that we are very used with an average child.
Yeah.
And we like for this kind of children, we don't have skills to teach them. Because most of our methodology is that look, do like that. But it doesn't work.
I can teach you a lot of methodologies for these kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's different. It's not the mean child. Okay.
I have a question about the cardiorespiratory.
Yeah.
In the paper, we were talking about DCD children. And I was wondering if it's normal for them to have cardiorespiratory difficulty.
Not in
and
the
that
beginning.
result would be, say, normal.
No, in the beginning you don't expect them to have a problem. Because there's nothing wrong with their heart. They're just not using it enough at a high level of their maximum heart rate. And if you never go above 60–70% of your maximum heart rate, you lose fitness, as you know. Yeah? So it's a simple thing, use it or lose it. So that's one thing, they're really poor. The other thing is the tests that we use often ask so much coordination that they show even poorer than they are. Yeah? But you know, running on a treadmill is not so much of a coordination thing. It's hard if you get off it. I always have problems after I get from the treadmill, sort of feels different.
It's because it's so interesting. Is there some relationship between the DCD children and the family context?
The family context?
It's family context.
Well, that's a very simple question. You know, if you are into sports, what will your kids do? If you're in a neighborhood where there's a nice park with all opportunities, most probably you'll use it. You know, if you're living in a slum and it's too dangerous to be outside and you get a bullet in your head, will you be playing outside? No, you'll be sitting inside watching some terrible television series that is not supposed to be looked at in those areas. Yeah, American series, whatever. So no. Of course it's related to your opportunities. But I think as a school, we should give all the children equal opportunity. And if we just focus on the mean child, that means we'll serve 68% of the children, because those are the ones that are normal. We won't look at the ones that are super good, and we won't look at the ones that are below average. And maybe these are the two groups that need us most, because the ones that are really good, they need to be stimulated and they can be our next national champions. And the ones that are very poor need us because they can't even survive in a normal world. Yeah? And just focusing on the mean, well, of course that's what you do, because you've got a lot of kids in the class. But kids can work in little groups. They can change stations, and it doesn't always have to be all 30 kids or 35 or 45. I've seen huge classes at the same time. But that's your area of expertise. Thank you for all these interesting questions.
Thank you, Bouwien, for this very, very nice talk. The School of Physical Education and Sports would like to give you this certificate to thank you.
Thank you.
For all the information you brought to us. And you are welcome to return whenever you want.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.